The movie opens with a flashback of a little girl named Katie wandering around in a Christmas market. There, she looks at all the decorations and ornaments with her mom, and talks about how everything is so beautiful. She then tells her mother that she wants to go to a magical place with just them and her father, since they're so busy all the time. In response, her mom simply says that their family has incredibly important duties that they need to abide by. In order to cheer her up, Katie's mother gives her a beautiful antique camera as her Christmas present. Katie instantly lights up after seeing her gift, and thanks her mom immensely. Soon, 20 years pass by, and Katie becomes a young woman who still has the camera given to her by her mom. It turns out that she isn't just some ordinary girl. Rather, she's the princess of a small country in Europe. Because of this, she has lots of duties and events to attend to. Moving forward, Katie and her Aunt Margaret travel to New York City during the Christmas season for some important meetings. Whilst there, Margaret informs Katie about all of the meetings, speeches, and events present in her itinerary. Every single action that is to be performed is decided by Margaret. This really annoys Katie, since she has no time for herself. Because of this, she could also never focus on her passion of art and photography, despite being an incredibly talented photographer. At present, even when Margaret goes on and on about Katie's daily itinerary and errands, the latter simply continues taking pictures with her camera. She ignores all of Margaret's instructions and just focuses on what makes her happy. This, however, doesn't sit right with Margaret, who curtly tells Katie to pay attention. After a long while of discussion, Katie tells her aunt that she wants to visit the nearby art gallery, but Margaret instantly refuses. She asserts that their schedule is too tight, and they can't afford to roam around the city. She further states that since their stay in New York is only for 3 days, they can't waste their time on art galleries and museums. Katie, now immensely upset at her aunt's decision, tries her best to reason with Margaret, but the latter doesn't budge. She begs for just 1 hour to visit the art gallery. Sadly, Margaret ignores her and walks past her to greet George, who happens to be Katie's mom's attorney. After a brief conversation with Margaret, George walks up to Katie and greets her happily. The two then talk for a short while about their memories together. The scene now shifts to a young man named Jack, who works as a renovation and restoration expert, working on designing a huge condo. Whilst working on the project, Jack tries his best to finish as much of the renovation as possible before the Christmas holidays. He calls several of his clients and negotiates with them. He then gets a call from a guy named Harry regarding an emergency, so Jack immediately rushes out of the condo. In the meantime, Katie reminisces about her childhood with George and talks about how everything was just so perfect when she was a little girl. She then goes on to complain about her duties and how she has to let go of her passion to serve as a princess. Hearing all this, George tries to comfort her and explains that being a princess isn't an easy task. Katie simply sighs at that and tells him that she just misses her parents, who sadly passed away a long time ago. On the other hand, Jack, who had previously run out of the condo, finally reaches a small magic shop. It turns out that Harry, who happens to be a middle-aged magician, has some bad wiring in his shop, which always causes the lights to go out. Because of this, Jack usually stops by to repair any damage or short circuits. Moving on, Jack fixes the wires in Harry's store, and even proposes to rewire the entire place as soon as he gets some time. Harry readily agrees to the suggestion and thanks Jack for his help. The scene now shifts back to Katie, whose conversation with George is abruptly cut short by Margaret. As usual, Margaret explains that Katie has other errands to run, which causes the latter to roll her eyes. Just as they're about to leave, George stops Margaret and starts discussing some important matters with her. Katie instantly takes this opportunity to run out of the hotel without anyone noticing. Desperate, she plans to roam around the city on her own and recapture the magic of her childhood. Back at Harry's magic shop, Jack repairs all of the malfunctioning circuits and prepares to leave. Right then, Harry invites him to a potluck where all of his friends and family will be present. But since Jack already had plans for dinner with his sister, Emma, he politely declines. Harry, however, refuses to take no for an answer, and asks Jack to come by for just a little while. The latter hesitantly agrees and inquires as to why his presence is so necessary. That's when Harry reveals that he has got a nice girl for Jack to meet. Upon hearing this, Jack instantly refuses and asserts that he doesn't want to date anyone at the moment. He then quickly leaves the store. On the other hand, Katie wanders around New York City with her newfound freedom. She captures several pictures of her surroundings with her favorite camera. Sadly, her excitement and happiness is short-lived, as a group of muggers steal her camera along with all her money. Katie doesn't realize this soon enough, but thankfully, Jack sees this and immediately runs after the thieves. Sadly, he fails to catch them. With a solemn look, he goes to Katie and asks her to file a report against the thieves. Katie, who finally realizes that her belongings have been stolen, starts to panic and tries to run after the muggers. She then quickly realizes that the thieves are long gone. Seeing this, Jack offers to help her, but Katie instantly refuses, not wanting Katie to roam around the city all alone. Jack hands her some cash and asks her to get back to her hotel safely. Katie simply smiles at that and thanks Jack for his help. The two then part ways. Back at the hotel, Margaret and George call several people to learn about Katie's whereabouts. They get worried sick about her and try their best to look around. Margaret even goes as far as to hire bodyguards and detectives to find Katie. When George sees this, he just scoffs and says that Katie has only been gone for a few hours. Margaret, however, simply ignores him and asks the detectives to find Katie as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Jack goes to his sister's house for dinner and is shocked to see her boyfriend Ross there. With a disappointed look, he asks Emma as to why he wasn't told about Ross's presence. Emma replies by saying that if she had informed him, then he wouldn't have joined them for dinner. Jack just scoffs at that and exclaims that he doesn't know how to bond with his sister's boyfriend. Finally, after much pestering from Emma, he hesitantly goes up to Ross and the two start chatting. After dinner, Jack walks up to Emma and tries to help her with the chores, but the latter instantly refuses. Instead, she asks Jack if he's been dating anyone. In response, Jack sighs and says that he just isn't interested in dating anymore. Hearing this, Emma encourages him to find a nice partner and settle down. It turns out that Jack had a pretty rough breakup about a year ago, which causes him to spend almost all of his time alone. Moving on, Emma tries her best to convince Jack to start dating again, but he completely ignores her. Not wanting to answer any more questions, Jack tells Emma that he has to go to Harry's potluck. He then bids her goodbye and runs out the door. The scene now shifts back to Katie, who appears to be lost in the streets of New York. She tries to call a taxi, but soon realizes that she doesn't have enough money for it. At the same time, the detectives hired to find her also try their best to track her down. Eventually, hours pass by, and it starts to get really dark. Katie begins panicking, since she has no way to get back to her hotel. She thinks of calling Margaret through a phone booth, only to realize that she doesn't remember her phone number. She then walks down the streets whilst trying to come up with a way to return. At that moment, she comes across Harry's magic shop, which appears to be brightly decorated for his annual Christmas potluck. Katie looks at the celebration and smiles. Just as she's about to leave, she runs into Jack again. As expected, Jack is surprised to see Katie and asks her if she's okay. Katie replies that she is, and even goes on to say that she loves to see Christmas lights gleaming at night. Jack, however, quickly realizes that something is wrong and invites Katie to the potluck as well. The latter initially refuses, but Jack insists, so she hesitantly agrees. The two then walk into the potluck together. Inside the magic shop, Harry and several of his friends dress up as Santa and chat amongst each other. As Jack and Katie walk in, Harry and his wife Dixie welcome the two and wish them a Merry Christmas. Katie instantly feels happy. She hides her identity from them all and gleefully chats with them for quite a while. After a long time, Katie enjoys Christmas and feels as though her childhood is back. Moving forward, Dixie immediately pulls Katie towards the dining area in order to grab some food. As soon as the two leave, Harry asks Jack more about Katie and even inquires if the two are dating. Jack, however, quickly clarifies the situation and explains that he hardly knows her. On the other hand, Dixie also starts asking Katie all about her and Jack. Now more excited than ever, she explains that he has never brought anyone to the potluck. Katie simply smiles at that and says that the two just met and don't even know each other properly. She then asks Dixie as to why everyone in the potluck is dressed up as Santa. In response, Dixie says that all the people present there are retired, so their only motive now is to make children happy. She further states that dressing up as Santa is their tradition now, which really warms Katie's heart. Back at the hotel, the head detective Simon approaches Margaret and informs her that he has checked with all the hospitals and even monitored police activity, but sadly, he couldn't find anyone with Katie's description. He further goes on to explain that Katie ditched her phone in the basement, because of which they can't even track her. As expected, Margaret gets even more stressed. With no other choice left, she asks George to help her. Meanwhile, at the party, Katie and Dixie continue chatting together. The two exchange several stories and have a great time. Jack quietly observes this, and then tells Harry about how he met Katie. He also admits that he suspects she's in trouble. Hearing this, Harry asks him to take care of her and make sure that she's safe. Eventually, Katie falls asleep right there on the couch, with no one but Jack by her side. Despite having met only a couple hours ago, Jack starts to fall for her. The next morning, Ross, who works as a TV reporter, gets an exciting job. It turns out that he had been hired to cover Princess Catherine attending a Christmas concert. With utmost anticipation, he tells Emma that this job will surely give him the exposure that he needs. At the same time, Jack walks up to a very sleepy Katie and gently wakes her up. The latter immediately jerks awake and rushes out of the magic shop. However, before leaving, she sincerely thanks Jack for inviting her to such an amazing Christmas party. Soon, Katie leaves and Jack is left all alone. Right after her departure, Jack realizes that Katie actually left her necklace behind. He quickly runs after her and hands her the necklace. In turn, Katie thanks him for his generosity. Jack even offers to drop her back to the hotel, but the latter simply declines. Instead, she offers to show him something special. Jack readily agrees to this, and so, the two get into his van. Moments later, Katie and Jack reach a beautiful art gallery. The two walk up to the exhibition whilst talking about their favorite artists. Meanwhile, Simon and his team of detectives also reach the gallery and start looking around for Katie. Thankfully, Katie notices them just in time and hides from them. She then quickly diverts her course and distracts Jack by asking to get lunch first. Jack, who is completely unaware of Katie's real identity, just assumes that she's telling the truth and offers to go grab some street food. On the other hand, a lot of news reporters, including Ross, gather around at Katie's hotel. They plan to cover the Spring Quartet Christmas concert happening soon. However, since Katie is still missing, George approaches the reporters and very awkwardly tells them that Princess Catherine is feeling under the weather. He goes on to explain that due to her busy schedule, the princess fell ill and will not be attending the concert at all. Hearing this, Ross storms out of the hotel. The scene now shifts back to Katie and Jack again, who appear to be wandering the streets of New York. Whilst walking, Jack notices Katie's fidgety nature and asks her if she's in trouble. The latter replies that she isn't, and tries to come up with an excuse. Jack feels suspicious about Katie, but doesn't think much of it. Instead, he just orders food for the two of them. After getting their food, the two sit down on a bench nearby and start chatting about their lives. At one point, Jack gets a call regarding an emergency. He informs Katie about this, and so the two drive away immediately. Moments later, Katie and Jack reach the condo that he is currently working on. Once there, Jack hurriedly rushes towards his friend, Freddie, and inquires more about the sudden emergency. Freddie informs Jack that they're installing all the skylights in the condo, so they need his help with all the installation. In the meantime, Katie roams around the condo and observes all the renovation going around. She's quite impressed by all the restoration that Jack has done and praises him for his work. The two then walk through all the different rooms in the condo whilst chatting. Jack, who is now convinced that Katie is hiding something, even offers to let her stay in the condo for Christmas. Katie initially refuses and explains to him that he doesn't really understand her situation. But eventually, after a long while of thinking, she starts to contemplate Jack's offer. Back at the hotel, a very suspicious Ross tries his best to get footage of the princess, but is stopped by Simon and his team. He insists on asking just a couple questions, and even tries to walk past the security team. Simon, however, refuses to let him pass through and orders him to go away. This makes Ross further doubtful about the princess's whereabouts. With no other option left, he barges into the hotel's reception and tries different tactics to get more information out of the concierge. Sadly, he fails miserably with this plan. He then waits for the concierge to tend to the other customers, and then sneaks past him to get to the princess's room. At the condo, Jack asks Emma to come over with some of the spare clothes. When the latter finally gets there, he tells her to hand over the clothes to Katie. Now more excited than ever, Emma rushes towards Katie and helps to dress her up. A few moments later, Katie walks up to Jack and asks him how she looks. As expected, Jack is completely blown away and falls head over heels for her. Emma quickly notices this and teases him about it. She then pesters him to pick out a tree for her, since they're just days away from Christmas. Jack tries to refuse, as he's already running on a tight schedule, and picking out a Christmas tree is a two-person job. Hearing this, Katie offers to help Jack, which instantly lights Emma up. She thanks Katie for her help, and even invites her to Christmas dinner. Katie, however, just evades the question and runs out of the condo. This makes Jack even more doubtful about her. At the hotel, a very determined Ross runs around and follows George, in order to learn more about what's going on. At the same time, Margaret attends several calls and informs everyone that Katie is just sick with a flu, and will be back to her home country before Christmas. She then hangs up and looks out the window, worried sick as to where her niece might actually be. Meanwhile, Jack and Katie finally pick out the perfect Christmas tree and prepare to take it back to Emma's house. Whilst doing so, the two throw snowballs at each other and have a lot of fun. They get really close and slowly start to realize their feelings for one another. On the other hand, Ross, who still hasn't given up on his plan, corners George and asks to interview the princess. When the latter refuses, Ross starts to threaten him by saying that if he isn't permitted to interview Katie, he will tell everyone the real story. He then goes on to explain that he knows about the princess running away. In response, George tries to clarify the situation and asserts that the princess just isn't healthy enough for an interview. However, at that moment, Margaret suddenly shows up from behind, whilst complaining about how Katie is just like her mother in terms of running away. Upon hearing this, Ross's face immediately lights up. He instantly runs out of the hotel with this breaking news. Back in the city, Jack and Katie grab some coffee together and walk around quietly. At one point, Jack asks her to join him for Christmas dinner. Once again, Katie refuses and gives a very vague excuse. She then looks at the decorations all around the city and talks about how her mother loved to celebrate Christmas with her. Now intrigued, Jack asks Katie about her parents, to which she solemnly explains that they actually passed away in a plane crash years ago. Soon after, the two of them run into Harry and Dixie, who are all dressed up as Mr. and Mrs. Claus. When Harry sees them, he instantly lights up and invites them over for dinner. At dinner, Harry and Dixie tell Katie all about Jack. They explain that Jack was actually a very big real estate broker with an MBA degree. However, he was also very grumpy, since he absolutely hated his job. Harry then reveals that Jack is actually his landlord and owns the entire building. Apparently, when Harry approached Jack, the latter rented the shop out to him. Soon after, Jack started to get intrigued by renovation. He quit real estate and started his own restoration company. This, however, didn't sit right with his fiancée, Gretchen, so she dumped him right then and there. Ever since then, Jack has completely given up the idea of love. When Katie hears all this, she feels quite sad for Jack and starts to empathize with him. At the hotel, Simon approaches Margaret and shows her a surveillance photo, which shows Katie and Jack standing outside an art gallery. Margaret carefully examines the picture and asks Simon more about Jack. The latter replies that he doesn't know much, but will find out soon enough. Back at the magic shop, Katie reveals to Jack that she knows all about his past. Jack simply smiles at that and explains that he is a lot happier with his job now. Just then, Emma and Ross show up at the shop and greet them cheerily. Emma hands Katie a fresh set of clothes to change into, and thanks her for all her help. During all this, Ross carefully observes Katie and tells her that she seems very familiar. He then tells Jack that his dreams are finally going to come true, since he now has the breaking news about a royal member's disappearance. Upon hearing this, Katie starts to panic, but tries her best to maintain her composure. Later that night, Jack and Katie head back to the condo. Once there, Jack gives her a Christmas present. Katie quickly opens her gift and finds a camera inside. She is immensely touched by this and thanks Jack. She then asks him to come to the art gallery with her, where she'll tell him about her real identity. Jack readily agrees to the offer and finally bids her a good night. That very night, the Spring Quartet concert commences. Katie is still missing, so Margaret and George attend the show, whilst also trying to find any news related to her. Ross, who's also present at the concert with Emma, looks around with his binoculars to spot anything unusual. At that moment, Emma pulls out the concert pamphlet and sees Katie's photo. Ross sees the picture as well and immediately runs out of the concert. Now annoyed, Emma tries to stop him, but he simply ignores her. The following morning, Katie and Jack go back to the art gallery. However, once again, Simon and his team arrive at the same place. Katie instantly spots them, and in a panic, kisses Jack in order to hide her face. Jack is stunned by this, and just assumes that Katie has fallen in love with him as well. Right after the kiss, Katie asks Jack if she can use his phone, and the latter readily obliges. Katie quickly calls George and informs him that she's okay. She then tells him about Jack, and further, asks him to hold Margaret off until she gets home. George understands Katie's situation and agrees to her request. He then tells about Ross and his quest to find the missing princess. However, that's when Simon's team spots Katie. Katie immediately hangs up the call and runs away while the guards chase after her. When Jack sees this, he thinks Katie is in danger and runs after her as well. He quickly picks her up in his van, and the two speed off. Much to their dismay, the guards take a picture of his license plate and start investigating. Jack and Katie soon reach Harry's shop and hide inside. Once there, Emma asks Katie as to why anyone would want to kidnap her. The latter is about to reply, but that's when Ross starts banging on the door. As soon as he sees Katie, he gets his camera rolling and starts to film his news segment. Now more confused than ever, Emma asks him what he's doing, but Ross just ignores her. Ross then barges into the shop and starts to desperately look around for Katie. While searching, he reveals that she is none other than the missing Princess Catherine. Upon hearing this, Emma realizes that Ross had been trying to expose Katie all this time. Now infuriated, she shoves him into a cupboard and locks him inside. She then accuses him of being a self-absorbed brat and immediately dumps him. Shortly after, Katie comes out of hiding and explains the entire situation to Jack and Emma. She then sadly admits that she has to go back home now. As expected, Jack is devastated by the news. He bids Katie goodbye and runs out of the store. Overwhelmed with emotions, Jack quickly gets into his van and tries his best to calm down. Whilst doing so, he notices the camera that he gave Katie and looks at the pictures within. Meanwhile, Katie thanks Emma and Harry for their generosity and promises to visit them again. She sadly bids them goodbye and walks out of the store. However, as soon as she goes outside, she sees Jack quietly looking at the pictures on her new camera. Not wanting to separate on a bad note, Katie approaches him and talks to him for a little while. At one point, Jack mentions that Katie never actually got to visit the art gallery. The latter just shrugs at that and asserts that all she ever wanted was 1 hour of her own time. Hearing this, Jack comes up with a devious plan to fulfill her dreams. It turns out that the owner of the condo that Jack is renovating at the moment is on the board of directors for the art gallery. Because of this, Jack somehow manages to vacate the entire place for an hour, just so Katie can visit it all alone. Soon, the two visit the art gallery, but their excitement is immediately cut short when Simon and his guards arrive at the scene as well. Seeing this, Jack hands Katie a Christmas hat and asks her to enjoy. He then runs out of the gallery and approaches Simon. As expected, Simon corners Jack and asks him about Katie. In response, the latter simply states that Katie is hanging out with her friends. Not wanting the police to get involved, Simon tries his best to convince Jack to just tell him about the princess's whereabouts. Finally, after a lot of pestering and convincing, Jack agrees to help Simon. He points towards the art gallery, from where multiple Santas walk out. Simon asks which one is Katie, but Jack refuses to answer. Soon, Simon and his guards chase after each and every Santa in an attempt to catch Katie, but they end up failing miserably. Jack, on the other hand, takes the elevator and goes straight to Katie, who is busy observing all the artwork there. Upon seeing him, Katie thanks Jack sincerely and expresses her gratitude for doing so much for her. Eventually, after a long while, the two of them walk out of the gallery together and see Margaret, George, and the entire security team standing at the entrance. They then embrace in front of a Christmas tree and bid each other goodbye. Margaret and George witness this and instantly realize just how much Jack and Katie love each other. So, right as they're about to leave, George asks Jack to come to their country, Montserrat. The scene now shifts to Katie's beautiful home country, where all the citizens are eagerly waiting for their princess. As soon as she arrives, they all cheer excitedly. Margaret sees this and gleefully tells Katie about how the people love her. Katie smiles at that, but deep down, she feels lost and heartbroken. However, she quickly regains her composure and gets out of her car. That's when she sees Jack standing in front of her. Katie's face lights up in an instant. Jack, who is now madly in love with Katie, confesses his feelings for her and tells her that he wants to spend all of their Christmases together. Katie reciprocates his feelings and admits that she's in love with him too. The two then get closer and kiss each other passionately. The movie finally ends with Jack and Katie celebrating their love with the entire country of Montserrat.